All right, let's talk about a word you hear literally all the time: cloud computing. We all use it, right? But what is it, really? It's this idea that completely flipped our digital world upside down, turning computing from a thing you buy into a service you use. Kind of like flipping on a light switch. Okay, so let's dive right in. To really get how revolutionary this was, you've got to understand just how confusing it was at first. Back around 2008, even the biggest names in tech, like Oracle's CEO Larry Ellison, were scratching their heads. He was famously like, "Isn't this just a new marketing buzzword for stuff we're already doing?" That confusion, right there, is why we so badly needed a new, clear way of thinking about this stuff. And the big idea behind it all was actually a really old one. It was this dream of treating computing just like a utility. Think about electricity. You don't have a power plant in your backyard, right? Of course not. You just plug into the grid, you use what you need, and you pay your bill. The dream was to do the exact same thing with computing power, make it available whenever you want, wherever you are, without you having to own a single piece of the heavy machinery. Now, to really appreciate why that dream was so powerful, we have to talk about the massive, expensive headache it was designed to cure. Before the cloud, if you wanted to launch a website or some new service, you were staring down the barrel of what's called the provisioning problem. Basically, you had to guess how many people would show up, and then go buy, install, and manage all your own physical servers to handle them. And this guessing game, it put companies in this horrible no-win situation. On one hand, you could over-provision. That means you buy way more servers than you think you'll need, just in case you get a big traffic spike. But what happens? You end up bleeding money on all this expensive gear that just sits there doing nothing most of the time. Or you could under-provision, buy too few servers. And if your site suddenly gets popular, it crashes. You slam the door in the face of all your need customers, and your big moment, well, it just fizzles out. And this chart, man, it just visualizes how crazy that waste was. A company had to plan for their busiest day ever, that top line, and pay for that capacity 24/7. But their actual day-to-day usage was way down here, that wavy line. That giant gap you see between the two, that's just cash, literally being set on fire day in and day out. But as bad as wasting money is, under-provisioning was so much worse. It could kill your entire company. I mean, look at Friendster, one of the first big social networks. A big reason it failed was because it was just painfully slow. People were waiting up to 40 seconds for a page to load. 40 seconds. Can you even imagine waiting that long for anything online today? No way. You'd be gone in a heartbeat, and you'd probably never come back. So, out of all that pain and all that waste, this beautiful, elegant solution started to emerge. And it wasn't just a small fix, it was a completely different way to think about building things on the internet. So here's the formal definition the pioneers laid out. They said cloud computing is really two things. First, you've got apps delivered as a service, think Gmail. But for our story, the really important part is the second piece, utility computing. That's the idea of giant data centers offering up their raw computing power, the hardware, the software, as a simple pay-as-you-go service. That's the bit that solved the provisioning problem. And this new utility model was built on three super simple but absolutely mind-blowing principles. First, it gave you the illusion of having infinite resources. Need one server? Fine. Need 1,000 more in the next 5 minutes? Click, you got them. Second, no huge upfront investment. You didn't have to go beg for millions of dollars to buy hardware just to get started. And third, the real kicker, you only paid for exactly what you used, down to the hour or even the minute. This just changed the entire game. Okay, so these principles gave us this new superpower called elasticity, the ability to instantly grow or shrink to meet demand. And there's no better way to understand how powerful this is than by looking at a real-world story that became the stuff of legend. So let me ask you this. Picture it. You're a tiny startup, right? You've built this cool new thing, you launch it, and it doesn't just do okay. It goes completely, massively viral, overnight. In the old world, that was a death sentence. But in the new world of the cloud, it was the dream. Well, this exact scenario happened to a company called Animoto. Back in 2008, they made this awesome service that turned your photos into slick music videos, and they launched it as an app on Facebook. For a couple of days, things were pretty normal, and then it just exploded. On the first day of this massive surge, they were chugging along on about 50 servers. Totally normal, totally manageable. But then their user base started doubling every 12 hours. And just 3 days later, 3 days, they weren't on 100 servers or 500. They were running on, wait for it, 3,500 servers. Just let that sink in. In the old world, buying and setting up that many machines would have taken months, if it was even possible. In the cloud, it just happened. And here is the absolute key takeaway from their story. For a company like Animoto, this cloud elasticity thing, it wasn't a nice-to-have feature to save a few bucks. It was a requirement for survival, period. Without it, they would have crashed and burned under the weight of their own success. Another Friendster. Now look, this new cloud model wasn't a magic wand. It wasn't perfect, especially in the beginning. Like any new frontier, it came with its own set of very real challenges and worries. And the folks who first defined all this back in 2010 were pretty clear about the hurdles that had to be cleared. So back then, people had three big fears. First was availability. What if my one cloud provider has an outage? The thinking was, well, you should build your service to use multiple providers. The second fear was lock-in. What if it's impossible to leave my provider? The solution was to push for standard tools that make it easy to move your data around. And finally, the big one, security. The opportunity there was to build really strong tools, like powerful encryption, right into the cloud platforms themselves.
So you can see the whole arc, right? In just a handful of years, cloud computing went from this old, dusty dream of a utility to a confusing buzzword nobody understood, and then boom, it became the invisible, foundational engine that runs pretty much our entire digital world. Every app, every website, every movie you stream, it's all powered by this.
And that kind of brings us full circle and leaves us with a final thought. This whole revolution started with that simple analogy, computing like electricity. But looking around today, the really interesting question isn't what is the cloud anymore? It's, can you think of any part of your digital life that doesn't depend on it now? Kind of makes you think, right? Thanks for tuning in.